Hello and welcome to Comic Book Herald's Creannotators. I'm Dave Busing, founder and editor-in-chief of Comic Book Herald, and I'll be interviewing some of my favorite creators in comics about specific runs, graphic novels, or series, looking for their insights on the inspirations behind the work and ideas readers may have missed. Today, I'm excited to welcome Lonnie Nadler, writer of Black Stars Above. Let me stop myself right there and say, did I pronounce that right? Really would have been good pre-recording material to have covered.
It's the last name is Nadler, but everyone says Nadler. So
Lonnie
I
Nadler.
know.
My apologies. My mistake.
Oh, please don't. It's not a big deal at all. I
Doesn't
never
bother you?
correct.
Yeah.
No, I never even correct people when they say it that way.
Yeah. I'm Dave Busing, and I get a lot. We get a lot of bussings in our family. I had a gym teacher in high school who went bizzing, which or beasing and stuff. It was just like it was all over the map. So that I bothered me more, but the general mispronunciation I usually don't have a problem with. But yeah, we're not going to be talking about last names. We're going to talk about Black Stars Above, a really cool 5-issue Vault Comics series that you have out, coming out in trade soon. And I wanted to talk to you about this work because it is a very unique insular kind of horror comic. It is, I mean, I think even describing it as a horror comic sets expectations that this book is working sometimes around, sometimes against, sometimes subverting, right? All of that stuff. Let me kick off by asking two parts. How did this story come to be, and how do you pitch a story like Black Stars Above that is sort of hard to encapsulate?
Yeah, both. I mean, the first one's easy to answer. The second one, not so much. Yeah, it came to be. I mean, I'm a big genre fan in general, and that's just sort of the area that most of my work finds its way toward, no matter how it starts. This one, I kind of knew the tone and the mood and had some of the imagery before I knew anything else. And I was reading a book by Margaret Atwood that's a nonfiction book called Survival. That's very briefly just her survey of what links Canadian literature together, and reading that sort of put this image in my mind of a young fur trapper going through the woods with, this mysterious package. And then me being such a genre having permeated my brain, there were these black stars there that were sort of encroaching upon her and whatever her journey was. So that was really the seed of the idea. And then from there, I did. I love research and I love history, so I did a year's worth of research into the history of the fur trade and what life was like at the time, especially for the Métis people. So the story just sort of kept growing and growing from there. As for pitching it, once I had a decent idea what it was, I sort of just wrote up a one to 2 page pitch that was so far from what the book ended up being. I think I pitched it as something really dumb, oh God, I wish I remembered exactly what it was, but it was something stupid like, we're putting Katniss Everdeen from the Hunger Games in the world of At the Mountains of Madness. And
Sure.
I've never read the Hunger Games. I've never seen the movies. I don't know anything about it. But that's just kind of the game you have to play sometimes when you're pitching, is the publisher needs to know that they're getting something that they can sell and that they can market. That's the biggest thing for them. They might love a story, but if they don't think there's a market for it, they're not going to take it. And I'm still learning that because my stories, like you say, sort of defy genre sometimes. So it's been a game of tricking people into letting me tell stories, and then once they approve it, I don't do what I told them I was going to do.
And you're at the story you meant to all along. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's funny. It is. In talking to a handful of creators now, it's definitely that sort of read if you like approach that you have to take in pitching and blurbs. But then obviously once you get out of that, you want to do your own thing, right? Because it wouldn't be a good story. It wouldn't be a good comic, a new comic, if it was oh, this is just a ripoff of something else, right? So I understand it as a reference point, but obviously it's limiting, I think, in what you can do.
Totally, yeah.
Especially, I guess, if you haven't read the Hunger Games, then it's it's really limited.
Yeah, it was just kind of you got to tell them too. It's not just that it's a mix of two things. It's that it's got to be two popular things. So
Mm-hmm.
they know that when they go to a comic book shop and the comic book shop is like, well, how the hell do I sell this to my customers? It's like, well, do they like the Hunger Games? Then they can read this book. It's not
Yeah.
like an esoteric mix of, did you like Zulawski's Possession and Ingmar Bergman's Persona? Because this is
Uh-huh.
the mix of those two things. Because most people,
And that one person raises their hand, right?
yeah, that's me, right? It's like I'm the one
Yeah.
audience member this was made for. uh, so you gotta just, and stories at the end of the day, as much as I write them for myself, they are for an audience. So it's good to, like, even though I wasn't trying to make the Hunger Games whatsoever, just having something in mind of, it has to be somewhat entertaining, or at least that the reader has to get something out of it. Maybe
Sure.
entertaining is not the right word for my work, but
Well, no, I think there's an entertainment to this. It's definitely not. There's more. It's more about tone. It's more about atmosphere. I think. Like you mentioned, the story's set in Canada during the late 1800s. What was it about? And you said you did like a year's worth of research, which is fascinating. What was it about the setting and an approach that grabbed your interest? Is it something that you had researched previously, or was this like, relatively new to you and you just went all in?
so I'm from Canada, and growing up, part of our history, part of our history classes, we have to learn about the fur trade, because that's really like the foundation of our of what is now known as Canada. And
Hmm.
so it's always been something that's fascinated me. But once I started researching, it was kind of like rediscovering all those things that I'd learned in school, and remembering why I liked them. And the fur trade is a 200-year venture, about, and so there's a lot of time within that it could have taken place in. And I specifically chose 1887 because the fur trade was largely completely dead at that point. Um, and it was a big time of transition for the country, and for citizens of Canada, for those who were indigenous to the lands, and for those who had come here from either France or England. So it was like a lot of turmoil, and it was sort of like a nation in between being not sovereign and then finding out what it was, and exploiting the people who'd been there. So it was just sort of this, it matched with all the themes I wanted to explore in terms of being a place of transition for the country. Um, and yeah, that was largely it. And it had to be after Louis Riel was hanged for his crimes. So it just turned out to be the perfect year.
Sure, sure, very cool. Throughout Black Stars Above, the narration is done via journal entries, and they're like hand lettered or handwritten. Certainly is the appearance, with these sporadic segments where it's crossed out but still legible. I was wondering, like, I really enjoyed this approach to a character's internal monologue, but I'm curious: is this a reflection more so of just the available writing utensils of 1887, or is there actually more to what's being crossed out than is maybe initially like what we would recognize?
Yeah, there's definitely like intention behind every word that's crossed out. Um, Part of it is, it like you say, it's what's available. The other side of it is the protagonist Eulalie is it's the first time she's been able to write, and anyone who ever writes knows how much editing gets done. And so sort of seeing a young writer go through the process of discovering that, like what words work and what doesn't, was a big part of it. And then a lot of words that get crossed out are either tense related, or plurals, or
Yeah.
proper nouns, and stuff like that. So depending on the scene, words would get crossed out, and it changes over the course of the book. Sorry, I'm trying to like talk about this without giving too much away, because like I don't want to like explain everything. But basically, over the course of the book, the words that get crossed out come to have specific meaning, uh,
Mhm.
and they change based on what was crossed out at the start.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Well, and I think that kind of it fits into, I think, to your point, like not wanting to spoil the ending necessarily. I think if we're going to, definitely we'll warn you as listeners. But like throughout the work, there's this nagging sense that not is all as it seems, right? And that there's this kind of terror lurking around the corner. It's not like a, kind of that horror jump scare type thing though, right? It's very subtle. How do you collaborate with like your team? Because I think it's Jenna Cha does like really amazing art here. You have colors by or letters by Hassan Oatsman Ellaway, colors by Brad Simpson. Like the whole team's really in sync. How do you coordinate that atmosphere together? Like, is that something you try to script in, or is it more just conversations with the team?
It's a bit of both, but it's different on this project because Jenna, the artist, she's my wife, so I live with her, and so it's like we were able to talk a lot about it.
Hopefully, there's some conversation then.
Yeah, but it just generally, my scripts tend to be very detailed because I'm so focused on the two things I care about most generally in writing are mood/tone and the form that a work takes, so like structure in the story. And so in order to communicate those things properly to the rest of the team, my scripts have to be sort of dense because like in issue 2, for example, where there's like the repetition of the 9-panel grids and like a character moving across the grids each time they appear, that's like a very deliberate choice that I'm making. So like I have to explain that to the team so that they understand why I'm doing that.
Right.
And it was pretty early on though that like everyone knew, like as soon as the first script came out, as soon as they got the like pitch, it was kind of like, okay, like we understand this tone. And thankfully, Jenna has very similar storytelling sensibilities, and neither of us like horror that is too in your face or that's too overt or that does, jump scares, especially in comics. It's just like kind of boring for us. And so we knew we wanted it to be a slow burn and very strange and dreamlike. So it's a combination of just being in sync with the team and then me being like a very specific writer and knowing what I want on the page and trying to communicate that as best I can in the script.
Sure. No, that makes sense. So that's interesting. You mentioned all that. One of the big reveals in the book in terms of the sense of dread is, and please correct me if I get this wrong, Ellaway, is that our main character?
Eulalie, yeah.
Eulalie. She discovers a, like, I don't even know how to describe it, like a weird bird-like creature, right? Some sort of alien creature, yes?
Yeah.
And it's this sort of like, you know what it actually reminded me of is I think there's a thing in Legion on FX, like season 2. I don't know if you've watched it, but it's this like bird comes out of an egg just covered in tar. It's like skeletal, right? It's just the visuals of it are kind of grotesque. They're kind of concerning, but it's like it's almost sweet the more time we spend with this creature, right? Like it's actually like it's not a big bad monster and all that. You mentioned, Jenna Cha is your wife here. Is that in creating that design, is that something that just comes from her head, or are you like trying to verbalize to her, hey, I have this visual for what this, creature should look like?
Yeah, I'm very specific about that kind of stuff. I think I gave Jenna like probably 5 different times I described this thing to her.
Yeah.
And Jenna went through a couple different designs of it before I was like, that's the one that feels right.
Yeah.
And yeah, I have my reasons for why I wanted it to look the way it looked, but it's that combination of it being threatening and terrifying in the sense of it's something we've never seen before, but also you need to feel a sense of compassion for it. And it's a very difficult line to walk, and it was a very difficult ask of Jenna. But she's so good at that she was able to pull it off. And then it was actually like originally when Jenna drew it in the comic, like Brad had colored it. I think he colored it like green because that's sort of like, when you're working in Lovecraft territory and you have something that looks something like this, I think the tendency is just to make it green because that's what, all those tentacle monsters look like.
Sure, right.
And I was like, no, like this thing is white, like don't color it at all, don't touch it. And that was a bit of, it wasn't an argument, but Brad was kind of like, I don't get why you would want to do that. And I think my editor was kind of like, I don't understand, why wouldn't you color something? And I was like,
yeah,
that's what it is, that's what it has to be. But
it's pretty wild inserting, like, in my memory now, a green version of that creature
I know,
into the
right?
story, because it changes it significantly.
Totally.
It really does. Yeah, it's like a very, like you said, it's very Lovecraftian. It's very, here's the monster. I think,
and
in a way.
I think Brad ended up putting some, like, they're almost like silvery highlights on it in some places, and then as it grows, there's a bit of blue on it. But yeah, it's because it's so representative of the world that she's in. Just having it colored just wouldn't have made any sense. So I'm glad it came out the way it did.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I can totally see that. There's much of your comics writing prior to this point is in partnership with Zach Thompson. How do you approach writing a story differently without Zach on board? Or I guess put another way, like, or I guess, how do you determine even a story that you necessarily want to tell as a solo act?
Mm. So Zach and I, when we write, it's very collaborative. We do everything together, like sitting in the same room. We break the story together, and then we write the script side by side.
Yeah.
And then I think, after we'd done 3 or 4 books together, it was kind of like, okay, Zach and I have a lot of the same sensibilities, but we also started writing before we knew each other. And so we wanted to kind of just go back a little bit to explore our own creative minds. And so in addition to the work that we were doing together and that we continue to do together, it was kind of like a conscious decision on our part to just individualize ourselves a little bit, because we were getting so like, oh, it's Lonnie and Zac, it's Lonnie and Zac.
Yeah, right.
And we didn't always want to do that. So, or we didn't only want to do that, I guess is the right way to say it. So anyway, once we decided that, it was kind of like, what's the right story for me? And then this is the book that feels most like me of any that I've done. And the writing process for it was both like super rewarding and extremely difficult, because I'd been used to having someone to bounce ideas off of and someone there to tell me if something's stupid.
Sure.
And talking things aloud makes a huge difference when you can just ideate. It just does something different in your brain when you're saying things aloud than when you're just stuck inside your own head. Sure. But that is also that sort of like madness that individual creators go through is also tantamount to the work. And I think you can tell the difference between this and something Zach and I do together. And so, yeah, it was just a lot of like rediscovering myself and my voice as a writer and how I'd grown over the last few years, and just trying to like stay true to what felt like me and my vision as much as I possibly could. And I think the most important thing I've learned over the years is like instinct and intuition is everything. So just making sure I was listening to that at every turn was really important. But like something you have to train yourself to do.
Sure. Yeah. And right now you're working on a Aftershock series called Undone by Blood, which is a really cool new series I recommend people check out, which you're writing in concert with Zach. Is that when you go back to working with him, is it hard having like gone your own way to then get back in the habit of collaborating, or you guys have done so much now that it's just, it's riding a bike?
Yeah, for the most part, it's pretty like, like you say, because we've done so much together, it's just sort of like you fall back into not old habits. It's just like, Zach's like my brother at this point. So it's like going home to visit your family or whatever, where it's just, you might not have seen them for a while, but once you're there, it's like nothing ever changed. And Zach and I have such a strong connection. When we're writing and when we're not writing, we're just very similar people and have very similar thoughts. So it's just sort of like a comforting place. And I think since we've both been doing work on our own, when we get back to working together, it's almost like a relief, because we know someone's there to kind of excuse me, someone sort of like have our back, and
Sure.
it's not like
Yeah.
solely on our shoulders.
Yeah. That is interesting. Yeah, because when I think about comics like writing partnerships, I think one of the interesting, like Abnett and Lanning, right, gets mashed. You get the Abnett and Lanning Guardians of the Galaxy type thing, and to the point now where I think there's a lot of comics fans who don't even realize like Dan Abnett has his own work, Andy Lanning has his, that sort of thing. Is that something that you kind of consciously are like looking to avoid, that sort of lumping, or is it, I don't know, I guess like you're kind of moving that direction just with doing works on your own and then you come together and produce good comics again, or is that not really a concern of yours?
It wasn't previously, but like I think as Zac and I realized we were like only ever being discussed together, that it was something that we needed to change. Just like we didn't want people to only think of us, as like, Zac and Lonnie. I think a lot of people still do, and so it's like something we're still working on.
Sure.
But we value individual identity, and so it's just something that like we did consciously, especially bring up people like Abnett and Lanning, and like they've had a great career, but their falling out is also pretty notorious. So it's like we just didn't ever want to get to a place where it was like we're doing books together and then all of a sudden we're not doing books together, and like people could perceive that in some weird way or whatever. So it's sort of like this thing we're trying to do gradually where we're still doing books together and we still love working together, but slowly we're branching out to do our own things.
Because it does feel like a band breaking up. It's got that like, oh, something must have gone terribly wrong. They're
right.
The Beatles aren't together anymore, right?
And we're also super conscious of like we don't want anyone to think that. So we're always like super supportive of each other's individual work, and we talk to each other like online all the time, just so people know it's like there's nothing wrong between us. It's just like we just wanted to tell our own stories.
Yeah.
So, but at the same time, it's like Zac and I think we'll be working together for years to come. It's just we might not be doing 3 books a year together like we used to.
Sure, totally. You had a chance, speaking of collaborations, to write a major XMen event in 2019 with Age of X-Man. What was that experience like for you? Because that was, you guys had worked together on a cable run, which I really enjoy. Is super good, like covering like the entire history of Nathan Summers. It's a fun cable series. But certainly like a lot of your other work is, pretty indie. And then all of a sudden like you're doing the X-Men event of 2019. Not all of a sudden, I'm sure it didn't feel that way, right? You've got a pedigree. Let me back it up. What was the experience like? Was that a huge deal for you as a a comics fan?
Yeah, it was. It was like both like super overwhelming and exciting and frustrating, and it was everything you would imagine doing an event would be this early in your career.
Sure. Yeah.
And we were very surprised when the offer came to us. We'd heard like sort of through the grapevine that a friend of ours told us like, there's an X-Men event coming. You guys are going to be involved. So just like have some like alternate universe stuff ideas ready. So we just thought, we were going to be given, like a mini series tie-in or something. And then when we got the call from Jordan White and Darren Shan, it was just kind of like, we want you guys to run the event. And we were like, what the fuck? Like, holy shit. So, it was like kind of a no-brainer. It was just like, there was a lot riding on the event in terms of like, it had to tie into the Uncanny X-Men stuff. But it also couldn't go into certain territory because everyone knew Hickman was taking over after that. So like, we couldn't step on his toes with any ideas. And there was, oddly enough, a lot of ideas Zac and I had that were not dissimilar to stuff that Hickman's exploring that kind of got nixed because
too close.
Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah.
So, and then, organizing.
Can you elaborate on any of those?
I can't, unfortunately.
Okay, fair enough.
So a lot of stuff then, you know, organizing an event was also like really difficult, just because, you know, Zac and I had so many rules we'd set out, and then when the books are sort of out of our hands, it's hard to like wrangle everything,
Yeah.
from writers, especially who have been doing this a lot longer than we have,
Yeah.
who have more credits to their names, you know, and the editors also. And so there was like us trying to maintain our vision while also trying not to be those assholes who think they come in and can call all of the shots and their word is God, you know.
Sure.
And that took up like almost a year of mine and Zac's life. And the thing with Big Two comics, I don't think a lot of people realize, is like the amount of things that can go wrong. And if something can go wrong, it will go wrong. It's just like Murphy's Law,
Yeah.
like encapsulated in an art form. So just like, you know, artist changes and colorist changes, and then certain teams wanting to do certain things with certain characters and having to move characters into different books and stuff like that. So it was just a lot of stuff behind the scenes that like made the storytelling process like harder than I think we would have liked. But at the end of the day, it just made us appreciate events more. And like looking back to the events we love, it's kind of like, oh my God, like the fact that, you know, they were able to pull this off so flawlessly is incredible.
Sure. Yeah.
And it's also like, yeah, I don't know, it's just an eye-opening experience, and one that like I feel fortunate to have had. Yeah,
Do you
so
think it's something? Do you think it's something you would want to return to, having had the experience, even if not necessarily running the show like that? Like even just for example, like Big Two work on major characters, right? And just kind of that level of attention and all eyes on you. Is that something like you're like, man, I've been through it and it's a lot. Would you want to do it again?
I definitely would. I would just I'd want to do it a bit more on my own terms, I guess.
Sure.
So like I think I'd just be more specific about what I was tackling, and the way I wanted to do it.
Yeah.
Was one like big thing I've realized in the last like few years, is just like, you know, trying to stay true to yourself and your vision and stuff like that. So
Yeah.
I would definitely do it again. And there's plenty of characters that I want to write. And like plenty of characters I've pitched on and stuff like that. So yeah, it's definitely very much something that's still like on the horizon.
Sure. Sure. Cool. So you mentioned like being true to yourself and Black Stars Above being this work that is like probably the most reflection of where you see yourself as a writer currently. Can you elaborate a little on like what that means to you in terms of like how you've improved as a writer, you know, because you've gotten, like I said, like you've released a lot of works over the last, you know, handful of years. Like the Drags and Black Mask stands out, you know, definitely. And like it's, you know, a good like resume you built up. What are the things that you look back now and you're like, oh, I'm much better at X. I'm much better at this piece of it.
It's such funny timing. I actually just 2 days ago went and found the first short stories I wrote from like 10 years ago that I used to post on this writing blog.
Sure.
And I like wanted to see if they were still there, and they were still there. And I read them and just like so cringy. It was like the most embarrassing thing.
Yeah.
But it was also sort of like heartwarming because I was able to see just how much I have grown.
Sure.
And
Yeah.
it was just a lot of things um, like pacing and mood and being able to communicate information without just saying it outright,
Mhm.
without doing exposition, without just explaining everything. So that's like a big thing. And my dialogue is like, it's crazy how bad my dialogue used to be. Like it's the kind of stuff that like now if I read dialogue like that, I'm like, this is bullshit. And then like I read my old work and I was like, damn, that was also bullshit. um, and then I think just my sense for storytelling, and like I was talking about earlier, this idea of listening to intuition is something that you have to train yourself to do. Because even back then, it's this. Sorry, I'm kind of jumping around, but it's this idea of like you you recognize where you want to be, like you have a certain taste and you know what you like, and then you do the thing and it's not that. It's like just the worst version of what you want to accomplish.
Yeah.
And so stepping closer to what you want to accomplish is just a matter of doing it and practicing and learning these like little technical skills, but also a matter of listening to your intuition. And that's in every regard. It's just this little voice that everyone has it, it tells you like something's off, you know. And that can be, I think when you start, it's like the big picture is off and you don't have the skill to be able to pick things apart.
Yeah.
But as you do it more, that voice of intuition will say like, oh, this line of dialogue is just reading weird. And the training comes in to like be able to stop and recognize that that voice is happening and to then correct the thing that's not feeling right. And whether that's a line of dialogue or a major plot point, it's always there, and you just sort of have to attune yourself to it and be open to it. And sometimes it sucks to have to change things. I've rewritten entire issues just because that voice inside my head was like, this just isn't right. So that was a big thing I think that's changed in my writing over the last few years, and something that even now I can tell, like even the dregs, which I'm still like super proud of, I can go back and I was actually just looking at it today for something, and while I still love the story, I can like look at things and be like, oh, I know even then I didn't like that I did this, but I didn't know another way to do it.
Yeah.
So I just like did whatever I could with the story. And not that, you know, my work is perfect now, but it's like everything I do, I think I get closer and closer to the stuff that I want to be creating.
Very cool. Very cool. What's like what are the comics or the creators that are like major influences on your work currently?
I mean, this is sort of cliche, and like I used to feel bad about it because it was like so horribly cliche, but I don't care anymore because it's like it's just what it is. And as soon as I say it, people will be like, oh yeah, of course. But like Alan Moore's work is like, it's hugely inspiring to me. And it always has been, you know, from when I was like a teenager, but I recognize things in it now that I wasn't able to in the past, just in terms of like his story structure and the way he tells a story, that I'm just in awe of. And that dedication to his craft is something I really aspire to. So, you know, it's always going to be Alan Moore is like my number one comics guy. Neil Gaiman, of course, I'm a big fan of Sandman. I love Charles Burns. A lot of those more indie guys like that. Junji Ito, I'm a big fan of. And most recently, the book that's probably like of recent work that's inspired me most is a book called Sabrina that was published by Drawn and Quarterly, I think, by Nick Drasno. I don't know how to say his last name.
I'm gonna let you say it so I don't have to mispronounce it.
But
I have the same problem. Yeah.
Yeah, that book, man. That book really it sparked something in me. And I've also really been in love with Eddie Campbell's solo work recently. Like I found him obviously from Hell, and and I recently started looking into the stuff that he wrote himself, that he drew, and I'm making my way through
Bacchus, or are you doing some other stuff
right now. Yeah.
Nice.
And Bacchus is so good, and I'm gonna pick up Alec also because it looks amazing. And so those kind of guys who like you can just tell they love comics, but they don't love necessarily like superhero stuff. There's just so much richness in their work and care in the craft. So in terms of like comic book influences, those are the big ones right now.
Yeah, no, those are all good picks. Kind of a peripheral question, but what's a comic coming out right now that you or recently that you think more people should read?
Oh man, there's a lot. I think more people should read Coffin Bound. That's Dan Waters, and the artist is Danny. And Brad Simpson, who colored Black Stars Above, is coloring that. And I think Hassan is lettering that too, actually. I could be wrong.
I
Anyway,
think it's
but that
littering
book,
like 40% of
yeah,
comics I check these days.
that book is incredible, and it's so bizarre. And it's the type of comic that I love both as a reader and as a creator. Dan, he just like, he gets me, you know what I mean? Like, it's like, I feel like his stuff is made for me.
Yeah,
So I love that. Ice Cream Man is amazing. There's a lot of people reading it, but I think more people should read it. It's like, it's big in the horror community, but I think outside of that,
sure.
it's like hasn't really found a massive audience, even though I wouldn't completely qualify it as just a horror book. And I don't think the team would either. Little Bird, which I guess, now it's been nominated for an Eisner, but I think more people should read that. I know a lot of people have, but it's Ian's work on it is amazing, and Darcy is probably the best writer to come to comics in a few years. And I've seen the new stuff that he's working on, and the new book that he's doing with Ian, and that book's going to just destroy people.
Yeah,
so
it looks amazing. Yeah.
Yeah, those are like three big ones I would keep recommending to people.
Great picks. Great picks. All right. Before we talk like other works you got going on and things you want to plug, final question on Black Stars Above is for somebody who hasn't given it a chance, and is listening to this conversation is somehow still on the fence. What would you tell them in terms of like this is what this book means to me, and like what do you hope people get out of it?
I think it's for people. I think if you're someone who reads comics and you're a bit disillusioned with just the general comics fare, and you're not super into Marvel and DC, and you want some, or even if you are and you just want something that's a little bit different, that's a little bit more like independent cinema and stuff like that, then that's what I've tried to do with Black Stars Above. And there's a quote from Franz Kafka that I think about a lot. That's about like the art we consume should be more than just entertainment. And he says fiction and stories should act like the axe to the frozen sea within us. And that was something I tried to keep in mind a lot when writing Black Stars Above. And it's not necessarily the easiest read, and it's dense and it takes a while, but I hope for all the things I put in it, it's a bit more, it's a bit of a richer read than some other books that you're currently reading.
Yeah, perfect. All right, cool. What else? I mentioned Undone by Blood, which you guys have coming out currently. What else do you have on kind of the horizon, or books coming out currently that you would like people to check out?
Yeah, so those are the two big ones right now. I have a lot of stuff sort of percolating on the back burner that like hasn't been announced yet. But
Sure.
Zac and I are currently working on a new book with Peter Kowalski, who drew Come Into Me for us at Black Mask.
Which is that book like earwormed into my brain for days. I was thinking about it a long time, yeah.
So the three of us are collaborating again on a book. It's a ways away from being made, but it's all been outlined and we're starting to write it.
Cool.
There's also something that Jenna and I are working on right now that also hasn't been announced. So I unfortunately have to be very vague about it.
No, I get it. Yeah.
And then my my big project that I've been working on is a graphic novel that hasn't been announced either, but I can say a little bit about it. It's a contemporary Gothic horror story, and if you liked Black Stars Above, you'll probably like this. It's pretty weird, but it's my version of a ghost story, I guess.
Okay, yeah,
is the easiest way to say it. But it's inspired by a lot of things that Black Stars Above was inspired by, but more so like the Gothic side of the horror tradition than the cosmic side. This time. So I hope that I can announce that somewhat soon. I've been working on that for like over a year already,
Yeah.
It'll probably be another year that I'm writing it. So I'm excited about that. Yeah.
Very cool. Very cool. I'm looking forward to it. Well, thanks so much, Lonnie, for taking the time to talk comics. I really appreciate it. And I'll loop you in when this is coming out and all that fun stuff. But thanks so much for talking to us.